take it away.
Thank you so much, Matt. Appreciate you.
Thank you,
And
Matt.
thank you so much to Jared and Dan for putting the Shift virtual event together. Again, Stephen A. Hart. I am host of the Trailblazers.fm podcast. It's an interview style podcast where I dive into deep conversations with successful Black men and women. And a couple years ago, I had the pleasure of interviewing none other than Jamila Souffrant of the Journey to Launch blog and podcast platform. And Jamila is another Jamaican sister of mine, an amazing mom and wife. And so happy to get a chance to chat with you here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. And as Stephen said, so Journey to Launch, my podcast is about helping listeners and journeyers. I've dubbed my audience journeyers, helping them reach financial freedom and independence. So distilling this information in a way that where it was previously maybe just not accessible or hard to understand, making it relatable, making it exciting. And so that's what I do with Journey to Launch, the podcast.
I remember us meeting back in 2017 at Podcast Movement in Anaheim, right?
Yes, I just started the podcast.
And I remember you asking questions and stuff, and just so impressed with what you've been able to do with your platform over the last several years. So congrats to you as well for all the success.
Thank you.
So I thought we could kick things off, right? And have you maybe talk for a couple of minutes about an episode that you created with Sean Rochester.
Yeah.
Talking about the black tax. Why'd you create that episode, and why now? Why replay that in the season?
So I did an episode called The Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America, back in February with the author of that book, same name, Sean Rochester. So I'd released this episode in February, early February. And even when I read, when I thought of having him on, when I had the conversation, I knew that in my almost 3 years of podcasting, it was like the most impactful episodes I've done, because I learned so much from that episode. As a Black person, I not only did I learn things that I didn't know, but I knew that because my audience is diverse for the most part, that so many people would be able to gain so much, because we talk about money on my platform, but then we also need to recognize like all the things that impact how we earn money, how we view money. And as a society, like to ignore the current situations of that, I think it doesn't help. So I released that episode in February. And then with everything that started to happen with George Floyd, and then especially the protests, it was coming up where a thought popped in my head, and I knew that the episode did well when it came out in February, but I said, you know what, I'm going to replay this episode, because I think, again, because of the climate, because people need to hear this, I'm going to replay it again. I did an updated intro with it to kind of like state my position and my thoughts and why I was replaying it. And so I released it. I forgot exactly when. What was it like?
I think it was the beginning of June. It could have been June 2nd or something like that. Yeah.
Beginning of June. And it was like a last minute decision. I was going to go along with my regular content because I had stuff we were, previously recorded. I was like, no, I'm going to re-release this one. And it did. So it was like the perfect time. It was what people needed to hear and to learn from. And again, I think if you start anywhere with my podcast, that's like one of the top ones to listen to, because I thought Sean did just like an amazing job of distilling really like the past 400 years of like why financially Black people are in the position they are, and then calls the attention to like the biases that are faced. And what I like to do, and I think we're going to talk about this too later on, Stephen, is not just, presenting the reality or the problem, but solutions to that. So what can we do about it? So with that, I just thought it was a great way to frame what was happening in the real world with how it relates to my content and helping journeyers, people who listen to the podcast.
Yeah. Absolutely. In the last session, Noreen, she was talking about, the pandemic and pandemic related content. And I think too often we feel a need to talk about our personal thoughts as it relates to what's happening, whether it's pandemic or it's social and racial injustice, or it's whatever personal thoughts we have on our mind at that point in time. And oftentimes it may or may not be related to the topic of our podcast. Um, I love what you just shared in doing an episode with Sean, which was on topic, right? With your platform, but replaying that episode at a time when that content really had, application for your listeners. Uh, Talk to me about some tips maybe on how we can fold in our personal thoughts without it taking away from the intent of our podcast and our platforms.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I know sometimes like you'll get people who like criticize podcasts for being like too personal sometimes, like just get to the interview, just
Yeah.
we didn't want to hear what you ate for breakfast, which I think this is a little different when you're talking about really what matters to you and what you care about. So I think it's one, you have to know two things. You have to know yourself, so know thyself about what you stand for, what you want to share, what you feel comfortable in sharing,
Yeah.
and then know thy audience too, because I find that yes, your audience is coming to you maybe for a specific topic, but the way you can create real connection. So not only are they caring about the topic, but caring about you is personally sharing more of your thoughts. And I do think there's a way to integrate that into your content. But before you do that, you got to really be clear that you're okay with sharing more personal things, more personal thoughts, because you stand firm in them. And even if your audience does not believe in it, maybe you'll lose listeners. Maybe you'll get people complaining, that you're being too personal. But if you are clear on your mission, and that maybe it's bigger than, I don't know, like just talking about email funnels, right? Like if you want to make it a more your brand or your podcast more focus based on like issues that really impact everyone, then I think there's a space to do it. But you have to be clear though that you're prepared to walk down that line, and then know your audience, because if you know your audience like really just wants to get to it, and and you want to keep them in that way, maybe you don't have time to peruse and to like veer off course. But I knew from interacting with my audience and speaking to them and creating the deep connection that I have with them that they like when I share more things they want me to share more like about my like life and my thoughts, and not only just talk about money. There are a lot of podcasts and blogs and content just about money, right? You can Google how to budget, how to do certain things, right? It's there. I think it's the way it's said and the personal spin on it. So you just have to decide if you're ready to do that as a content creator.
Can't agree enough. I think there is definitely a balance of authenticity, right? To your point, there's so many places that somebody can go and hear about money, but they're coming back to your podcast and your platform each and every time because they've built a connection with you. At the same point in time, there's a balance of professionalism, if you will, about getting to the content in the right frame of time. But I think whether you are trying to serve everyone, or you're serving a particular niche, it can't be said enough to know who it is that you're speaking to, and making sure that what you're saying is in alignment with that audience. There's so much, you and I were talking about this the other day. There's so much right now for podcasters, content creators as a whole, around the whole cancel culture. And so many people are in fear of creating content, hoping not to get canceled, right? And I loved when you were like, "Yo, know thyself," right? What do you think about this whole cancel culture piece?
That's the thing about knowing yourself, right? Like there are maybe certain ideas or thoughts that I have that I am not ready to share them maybe publicly, or I don't know how to share them yet. And so I think one of the things too, is like, it's okay. I know there was, things going around about silence being like complicit. And in some regards, like seeing like injustice and wrongdoing and saying nothing and not speaking out, I think is an issue. But just to say something for the sake of it, to be performative, or because it looks good, but you really don't feel that way, I think is an issue. And I think your audience and people will see through that, or it will come out that that's not how you really feel. So that's why I actually believe in more taking your time to think and research. So that way, when you do state your opinion, you are prepared for what comes with that. And so if that means that maybe there's a segment of your people that once loved you and now don't like you anymore because of your thoughts, you stand firm because you thought it through and you know that's how you feel and that's what it is and you're ready to defend that stance. But it's really important to not just like jump out and say it because it looks good, but to really take time to reflect and make sure that it's a position that you can stand on and communicate effectively.
Yeah. The balance, I think, that we need to see more of. There are some people that will come out and say some things that truly do offend you, right? And in this season, I think there needs to be more of a balance, though, with allowing people to speak and not be canceled, but to inform them, right? And to be able to help us come to a common ground. And some things absolutely beyond, the limitations of that. But I still feel like there needs to be more middle ground. Don't know if you want to talk to that any, but I totally agree with you on the other side. Know where you stand, feel comfortable speaking your mind, but
yeah, and I think too, it's also okay to change your mind. I think I change my mind all the time about things. I think that's part of why people need to be allowed to ask questions and to explore different ideas that are outside of their own. Because if everyone stays within just their bubble, then nothing happens. There's no change. There's no synergy. So, and I think approaching content that way, outside the box and thinking of ways, and, there are some ideas I have for podcast episodes that have nothing to do with money, like head on, but it's like it impacts the whether it's like mental health, but it impacts like the way someone shows up if they do have mental health issues or need mental health assistance, how they earn money, right? So I think it's all related. So there are things that like not necessarily are always related to money that I'm always thinking through, how can I present this to my audience to help them? And when you start thinking outside the box, I think it's helpful because that's when you're presenting new ideas that are fresh, that people are excited about to do. And so I just got a little thing that said, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A section if you want us to answer anything towards the end of this.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you because I think with COVID happening, right? So many people now have flooded IG Live, flooded streams. I mean, everybody's running a LinkedIn Live, a IG Live, going to video. What are your thoughts about maybe leveraging, not necessarily having to put it behind the journey to launch brand, but Jamila jumping on an IG Live and speaking your personal thoughts and getting notes, right? Because sometimes it's just we want to express our thoughts and opinions, and we're leveraging the one content platform that we have to do so. But what's your thoughts about maybe not necessarily utilizing the platform through the podcast, but leveraging other areas where a community are following you?
Yeah, I think it's hard to actually separate like the two, meaning like if you have personal ideas that you state publicly and you have a platform like a podcast, putting it on maybe your personal, like if it's a public personal IG, still I think impacts your podcast because, people will see that and be like, well, did you know the host feels this way or does that? Like they'll still connect the two. So I think either way, like don't present one kind of way maybe on your show and you have a totally different stance or approach personally, because I think that won't last long where then it starts to feel inauthentic and your audience will kind of pick up on that. But I do agree that if you don't want to get as personal on your platform, your podcast with certain topics or issues, if you have social media, you can start to, I would almost test ideas, how receptive your audience is to you being more personal about your thoughts on things, about different topics related to whatever you're talking about. You can actually test that on social media based on maybe like a post or a live that you do or a tweet. You can kind of see the feedback you're getting there.
Yeah. And that's a great point. I wouldn't advocate for necessarily speaking out one way on a IG Live or on a Facebook video, and then advocating or speaking a different tone on your podcast. But I'm just thinking of a way to use your voice, but not necessarily flood the podcast, right? So you have this 5 or 7 minute pre-chat before you jump into content because you wanted to get it off your chest.
Yeah, and I agree. One of the things I actually started doing, because I found that sometimes my intros before I got into the content of the podcast was getting a bit long. Like even when I listened to it, I was like, okay, like when are you gonna get to the interview? So I get it. Sometimes what I used to do and I still do is if I really maybe have an opinion like on something or I want to share something more personally, I say I'll preview, like I'll say wait till the end of the episode, I'll talk about this more.
Ah,
So that way if they care about it, they'll stay longer or they just fast forward. But I don't like bog down. I try not to. Don't Doesn't always work, but I try not to bog down the beginning of it with a lot of personal stuff. I might just say check out the end for some personal updates.
yeah, that's good. I love that. Again, if you're just tuning in or if you've been listening to the conversation, definitely put your questions or comments in the engage tab. We'd love to be able to answer any questions you might have. Jamila, what do you have happening coming up? You know, what are you maybe leveraging from this change in the tide and the season? How are you looking at content differently going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, at one point I second guessed putting out the episode because replaying it because I thought I just, you know, relatively like I just put it out a few months ago. Like, you know, what if people are just like, why are you putting this out again? I heard it already. And putting it out and getting the response just reaffirmed that I should go with my instincts more about things where you're maybe afraid to say something. Sometimes I find when I'm afraid to admit something on the show or share something, like that's the moment that someone will say, when you share that, that helped me so much. So I think trusting my instincts more and bringing that actually more into the podcast is something I'm going to be doing more of. And then it's also, again, when you know thyself, it's not also thinking about validation from others. Like, of course, you know, you're looking at downloads and you're looking at responses on social about like an episode. But you know, I try to think, yes, it feels good when someone says they enjoyed that week's episode, but how do I feel? What if no one responded? Right? Did I feel good about that episode? So I think leaning with more about what it is that I enjoy sharing and what I think is helpful. Of course, getting the feedback too is helpful, but I think starting personally first, internally, making sure that's secure is the way that I'm doing even more of going forward.
Is there impact? I'm sure everything you've always done has had impact in a 360 capacity, but as a wife and a mom, you kind of speak from that perspective with your platform. How does that kind of change things for you? I mean, especially as it relates to the racial and social injustice, right? We're both married. We're both black people. We're both married to black people. We have young black kids. Does that inform and change kind of your angle towards content, even though you have a broader platform and you're speaking to more people?
Yeah, it definitely, I mean, does. I think that's why people resonated at first with the like journey to launch. Like when I was talking to some listeners earlier today and they were like, it seems like I'm talking to a friend. And that's because I do interject, you know, like I'm married to a teacher. I grew up in Brooklyn, like all these different things about my journey, which other people can relate to. So when it comes to now sharing my thoughts about what's happening in the world today, you know, I'm directly saying, you know, as a mother of 3 small children, I want them to be safe in the world. I want them to be confident. So I lead with content that if I hope one day they heard, it would help them on their journey. So yeah, I'm incorporating all that to help manage my decisions on who I bring on, what I talk about, and what I share.
Love it. Hey Matt, how you doing, man? I think you're on mute. There.
Hello. That was my fault. Hi, juggling it all. This is great. Our questions are starting to like blow up, so I'm going to get right to them. The first question is it's from Daniel Hood. Should the title of your show reflect your personal beliefs?
I don't know. Do you want? I think in both cases, it for me, Trailblazers was me showcasing the stories of Black professionals who are truly successful at whatever they want to do in their lives, and so I feel like it is reflective of that on some level.
Yeah, I think I think it should always reflect something that's important to you. Like, it's funny because Journey to Launch, if you had no clue what that was, you're like, is this how this is about money? Like, there's nothing in the title says anything about money, but my concept was more about launching to financial freedom and independence and all these things. And so I think as long as it means, whatever you call it means something to you, and if it's presented to other people, you can defend or be proud of that name, whatever it is. I think is all that matters.
All right. This and kind of going when you're thinking of what to do and what we want to do good, but how and what do we talk about? Transient Jessica asked, what methods do you use to identify what current events or podcast topics might resonate well with our listeners?
Do you want to jump on that?
So hopefully if you're on social, or even if you're not, like, you're around the people that are interested in your content. So even if that's like following other people who talk about something similar, maybe they don't have a podcast, but they blog about it, or you found your listeners and you're interacting online, it's also seeing what they're sharing and talking about. Right. And so if the common theme, like, obviously for a lot of people are student loan debt, and or how to get past certain things, like, so I'll sometimes tailor an episode and I see someone talking about student loan debt in a way that resonates with me. I'll say, oh, I want to get them on the podcast, or I want to make sure I have an episode about that. But I know that because I'm in touch with my listeners, or they're actually asking, like, I'm asking them sometimes, what do you want to hear? Like, what topics do you want to see more from me? Like, I actually ask that sometimes, so I get that direct feedback.
To double up on that, what Jamila just said, I am always looking to engage with listeners, especially on Twitter and Instagram. And if somebody raises their hand and says, hey, I've been listening to the podcast for a while, I'm deliberate about getting that person in the DMs, seeing if I can get them on our call, talking to them, trying to get in their head and understand who they are, what they do. But more importantly, what's keeping you up at night? What are you challenged by? And by way of doing that more and more, I'm beginning to understand the audience of my listeners and what challenges they're having. As an interview style podcaster, when I'm interviewing Jamila and she's beginning to talk about a topic that I know one of my listeners has had a challenge with, I now shift from being the host to speaking on behalf of Jamila and asking those questions. And then also just looking at what topics are trending as it relates to the topic of my show. That helps to inform the topics and conversations, content that we create.
So kind of going off of that, another listener had a question of, so you decided kind of what you want to do, how you want to do it. You said, I use the word a lot because I watched a lot of Oprah as a kid, intention. You have an intention. Is there actual metrics to how much of your show they're asking? Is there a percentage of content that relates to your podcast theme versus content that relates to current events that they should use as a metric?
Yeah. I'll fold in. I'm probably more tilted to steering away from current events and timed topics, specifically for Trailblazers. I lean to creating content that's somewhat more evergreen, that you could listen to 5 years from now and pull away content of value just the same as you would today. So I maybe won't speak to that as much. If I can lean in without speaking to the current event, I will by name. But I'm probably not well equipped to speak to that from that angle.
I'm going to interrupt you because I want a specificity there. How do you lean into a topic without saying it? Or like, can you give me an example? Just because I think that some people, that's kind of what they're struggling with.
Right. Jamila, do you touch on current events any?
Not kinda, and I know you're like, I get the question because like when COVID, like everything started to impact everyone and they were like home, I did some so I record my episodes so far in advance sometimes that I knew some of the episodes like would be if I just released it as is, would be a little out of touch for people. And so what I did was I updated the interviews. Like first 2 of them, I did updated like interviews. Like I released a regular interview on Wednesday and said, hey, but we're also doing an updated chat because things has changed so much for this person and they want to share real time what they're doing to get by. And those did really well because it was good hearing from the people initially about their journeys, but then to hear updated. How are you doing now that you lost your job? Or there's some financial instability. Like that was really helpful. So approaching it evergreen, like even the episodes, like or the conversations, I try to make sure that it is that way. But then if there is something that's really pressing that can't be ignored, I do try to, whether it's through my intro. So I try to actually record my intros a little closer to when the episodes are released. So even though I might do the interview beforehand, like months in advance, my intro might include something related to a current event. And then I reference, if you're listening to this in real time, when this episode comes out, I might like say that about a thought I have.
Yeah.
But then I also say and remind people, but this content is like literally doesn't matter when you listen, you'll be able to get something from it. So I kind of gauge or put listeners in that time frame by some of the prompts that I use when I speak.
Very similar to that. I will leverage that welcome ahead of our conversation and try to still steer that conversation. That said, Matt, I tend to theme content throughout the course of the year. So I'm focused on successful Black professionals. I'll have the first 6 episodes of the year talking about wealth, specifically around the wealth gap that the Black community deals with. I'll focus in on content around Black History Month in the month of February, etc. So it is timed to align with maybe things happening throughout the course of the year or things important to the Black community, but still at the same point in time, not necessarily leaning into where I'm timing that content for the entire episode. If I can during the welcome and give a voice to a quick thought, I might do so, but steer away from making it irrelevant in a few months.
Well, and I think what you both are doing intentionally and just instinctually is when you're making content that begins with the intention of helping people or educating people, I think, like you were saying earlier, it innately is going to feel current and be tied to the current events, because everything that you both have been talking about, I think would be relevant 2 years ago. And it's just more relevant now because white people are finally realizing that we need to notice this. So anyway, I think so. A lot of people, if you're at home thinking, what can I do that's current event? I think if you're already leading with that intention of how can I be a good listener? How can I be curious? How can I make this world a better place? It's going to resonate already. Sorry, I'm not the panelist. It's just a soapbox. We do have one more question. I think we have time, maybe 2. What, Jamila, I can't remember the name, but I know the question. The question is, who is doing something in podcasting right now that's really inspiring and really interesting to you?
Let's see. That's a good question. I'm always inspired by the more produced podcasts, even though like I'm an indie podcaster, I do this. I have like an editor, but like the How I Built This podcast, like I know they have like a big machine behind them, but I love the way Guy interviews and how nuanced he gets with some of the questions and how laid back he is. And so it's not like it's like groundbreaking that he's interviewing people and their journey. I just feel like the impact or the way I feel after some of those episodes is how I want my audience to feel. So I'll often, tune into that and take some inspiration on getting deeper with when I interview people from like episodes like that.
I want to make sure, I think we have a little more time real quick. Bree asked that she has a show that's been called Niche. And people have told her it's to a small community. How do you embrace that, or do you overcome that when you're putting that obstacle in your way?
You absolutely embrace it. Know who you're trying to serve. I think it allows you to be much more direct with your messaging, with your content, serving the problems of a specific community. And also too, Bree, Trailblazers has been a niche show for the last 4.5 years. I've benefited from that, building a community that's highly engaged, but I've also gotten tens of thousands of dollars in sponsorship money because I was extremely clear about who it is that I was serving and I'm serving. And because of that, sponsors knew exactly who they wanted to connect with. And it was clear based on me niching in who I was serving, and they wanted to be a part of that. So can't speak highly enough about owning that. Own that small community. Understand you're going to repel a lot of people and be okay with that. Receive it.
Agreed.
Not everybody has to like you.
Not everyone has to like you.
I
Absolutely.
happened to be at 40. I finally got it. I was like, forget it. Y'all, Stephen and Jamila, y'all, this was a great conversation. What a way to come back from the break to feel inspired. Thank you so much. And I'm sure people will connect with you, reach out to you on your socials. We'll have all that on the website that people can continue this conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us, man.
Bye.